Ambassador Misri, thank you so much for accepting our interview. I understand you are a veteran diplomat with the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. You've served in different places. I understand Africa, in the Americas and other parts of Asia. What does this post mean for you now that you are from India, one of the second most populous country in the world, to the most populous country in the world, and at such a extremely important period of time in history? What does it mean for you?
Well, you said I've served in a number of places around the world, but I have spent most of my time in Asia, and I've had the good fortune of serving in three other immediate neighbors of India. But I think the posting in China, obviously, I would regard in some sense as the pinnacle of the career that I've had so far in the diplomatic service. And this is not just because of what China represents in and of itself as a great civilization and as a leading country on the global stage today, but also in terms of the enormous importance that this particular bilateral relationship has for India. And indeed, the India-China bilateral relationship is important not just for us, but also for the region and indeed for the international community. And as you said, we are working and we are going through a very formative phase in international politics, international relations. And I consider it a privilege and an honor to have been selected to represent India in China at this point in time. I'm really looking forward to that, and bringing my own perspectives to the relationship and contributing to the work of strengthening this very, very important relationship for 40% of the world's population.
Absolutely. Welcome to China, welcome to Beijing, and to your wife as well. Well, I understand you arrived in January. How long did it take for you to really sink into this position? Was there a moment of truth when you realized, okay, this is it?
You know, when I walked into the embassy, one of the first things I saw was the board which has the names of my predecessors on it. And we have some really, really remarkable people on that board. So that was a bit overwhelming to begin with. But then I saw that my name had already been inscribed on that board. So that made it a little bit easier, that I'm already now in this club, and I just have to go out and do what I have been trained to do. It is obviously a big challenge for me, but I also see it as a major opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are fortunate at this point in time between India and China to have leadership that has great understanding amongst themselves. And they have, in a sense, provided guidance over the course of the last few years. And I look forward to benefiting from that. And I have no doubt that with the support of very able colleagues in the embassy, I'll be able to give a good account of myself.
I understand you come in a fairly good position as the relationship between the two countries have been moving quite steadily, right? And yet we know elections are going on back in India and the results are to be known later next month. So does that mean any uncertainty for the future bilateral ties? How much confidence do you have at this moment?
Oh, no, not at all. I don't think it raises any questions about the future of bilateral ties. Firstly, I would say that there is an unwritten consensus in India on major foreign policy questions. And you would see that foreign policy is usually not a much debated subject in Indian elections. But notwithstanding that, and there will be instances when certain aspects of our relationships might get raised in the election debate. But I think what's most important is that the broad axes of our major relationships enjoy a certain consensus across the political spectrum in India. And that is something that has been borne out in the steady development of all of our major relationships over the course of the last 30 years, when different political parties have held power at the center in India. So I am quite confident that no matter which political formation or which political party comes to power in India, that it will maintain the steady progress that we have witnessed in our major international relationships, and particularly with regard to China. I think the gains of the last few years will be preserved and in fact promoted by the leadership going forward.
Yeah, so you mentioned the gains of the last few years. Would you elaborate a little bit exactly what do you have in your hands to build on in the next 2-3 years?
Well, I would say that the close relationship that has been established between our leaderships in the last 5 years, and in particular the intensification of this contact that began with the Wuhan summit last year between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, that is a major gain in our relationship. I think they share a very special relationship, and they have also provided, in a sense, a compass to the bilateral relationship that helps guide the efforts of the officials. They themselves met 4 times last year, and what this contact has done is that it has strengthened strategic communication between our leaders and our officials, and that is helping us in navigating day-to-day issues in the relationship. I think we, both of us, regard this as a very important relationship, and there are, of course, large elements of cooperation in this relationship, and in a relationship as large as this there will also be elements of competition. But I think in the last few years we have seen elements of cooperation as trumping the elements of competition. And we have today, I think, on the very good understanding in a number of political forums, bilateral political forums between ourselves, and we are working very hard to expand the trade and economic relationship, and on the people-to-people relationship, which is a very important aspect of that.
What would be your priority? What would be your #1 priority? Is it to improve political ties? Is it to strengthen economic ties or people-to-people exchanges?
Well, if you ask me, if you give me 2 priorities, because I think working on certain aspects of the relationship will automatically translate into a situation where other aspects of the relationship will benefit and improve in their turn. So the 2 aspects of the relationship that I would focus on particularly would be our trade and economic relationship and our people-to-people contact. The trade and economic relationship obviously is a very large relationship. It's our trade will probably very soon cross $100 billion, but there are aspects to that relationship, including the trade deficit that is in favor of China by quite a large margin, needs to be rationalized in order for it to become sustainable, and we also need to see investments in addition to trade. So that would be a very big priority for me, especially because India is the world's fastest growing major economy. There are enormous opportunities there, and I think there's no reason why Chinese companies cannot find opportunities in some preferred sectors there. And the people-to-people contact is really obvious for 2 countries that share such an old relationship. I think our contemporary people-to-people contact needs a lot of work, and we need to bring our people much closer together. It is the understanding that is going to be born out of this that will help us deal with the knotty issues in our political relationship.
Absolutely. Let's go to the economic relationship. As you mentioned, trade actually jumped really fast, right, over the past few years, and at this moment I understand it stands at about $95.5 billion. So very soon it's expected to reach the $100 billion mark. Let me ask you this question: wouldn't the Belt and Road Initiative greatly help enhance trade relationship between the two sides? You are talking about more Indian goods being sold to China and also greater investment from India to China. I think the Belt and Road Initiative, or many people would say the Belt and Road Initiative is exactly such a platform to facilitate that kind of exchange. What is India's consideration on that?
Well, to the extent that you look at the whole issue of connectivity related initiatives, we actually value connectivity as much as anybody else, and in fact it plays a very important part in our own initiatives in our neighborhood. We are working with our neighboring countries and with other partners in our neighborhood as well as further afield to promote connectivity wherever we can, connectivity infrastructure. And the issue is that we have a particular thinking or view on how connectivity related initiatives should be, how infrastructure connectivity should be put in place, how should it be built, how should it be promoted. And I would say two main things to you. The first is that we feel that infrastructure connectivity should be aligned with national priorities and should respect certain or follow certain norms that are well accepted and broadly accepted around the world, which include elements of transparency, openness, a level playing field, social and environmental sustainability, and financial sustainability. That is something, those are principles that we follow in our own initiatives. The most important, of course, being that they must be aligned with national priorities. That is one basket. The other basket is that these initiatives can be sustainable and successful only insofar as they respect issues related to sovereignty and territorial integrity. And in these, on one or the other of these fronts, we have had concerns with regard to the way the Belt and Road Initiative has been put out. And our views are not unknown, our views are not a secret. These have been made known to the Chinese authorities, and we have had conversations with regard to this, and I am quite sure that Chinese authorities understand our position and our point of view. I would also say that the point of view that we have had with regard to especially issues related to sovereignty and territorial integrity is not a new point of view. It is something that's a very long held point of view by us, and I would imagine that our partners and our neighbors are well aware of our position with regard to this. But I want to make one very important point in the context of what you said, the premise of your question with regard to trade and Belt and Road. Despite the fact that we are not part of the Belt and Road Initiative, there has been no impact on bilateral trade between India and China. And as you pointed out yourselves, we've seen an exponential growth in bilateral trade between India and China, on the other hand, despite our not being. So we don't necessarily need to look at India-China trade or indeed the larger economic and commercial relationship through the prism of BRI. I think we can very well progress on that front.
Well, I want to say that the trade between the two countries grew, for instance, from 2014 at $70 billion US dollars to 2018 at $95.5 billion US dollars. That is pretty good growth, but compared to the growth of trade between China and Belt and Road countries over the same period of time, that growth is really very, very small. So there is great potential that needs to be tapped into there. You talked about transparency, the level playing field, all of these are being raised. I was just at a forum the other day, and actually the countries that are involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, they say, for us who are part of it, it is not a problem. It's only for the countries who are watching it from outside that seems to be a problem. And also, if the Belt and Road Initiative is a developing thing, is a growing initiative. So there is the possibility that when more countries come in, these things can be negotiated, can be talked about, and better standards can be put in place so you can change it by being part of it. Actually, India is one of the founding members of the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So what does India think about it from this perspective? I mean, the train is moving along, whether or not India is on board.
That just goes to prove my point. You know, the fact that we are part of the AIIB, and the AIIB is actually funding projects in a number of countries around this region. Each project is assessed on a certain number of parameters, and if the parameters meet the standards that have been set for the AIIB, and the AIIB is a world-class bank, it follows very high international standards. Every project, and I think if I'm not mistaken, India is probably the largest client of the AIIB. So every project is subjected to a study, and if it passes those tests, the project is approved, and we have absolutely no problem with that. So this is precisely what I was saying, that if we are in agreement about the parameters, we would have no objection in going forward with any of the partnership initiatives. But as I said, with regard to the BRI, there is also the other element of issues related to sovereignty and territorial integrity, and those issues have not been addressed in the context.
Okay, well, yeah, China's position, the latest that I understand is China is ready to wait. If India decides to change its mind, China is going to exercise patience. So let's see. I think another very important opportunity that might be missed is the boost from this initiative to people and cultural exchanges, because this is not just about infrastructure. This is also about culture, about, for instance, films, about connecting flights between these two countries, about connecting people, exactly what you say about improving people ties. I just want to raise this number that I understand there are only 50 flights between China and India on a weekly basis, but there are 500 between China and ROK. So wouldn't there be opportunities in this initiative for exactly what you want to do?
Well, I think all of these aspects of bilateral relations, whether it is increasing the number of flights, aerial connectivity between our two countries, greater trade and commerce, closer cultural contacts, greater flow of tourists from one country to the other, promoting films. I understand Indian films are very popular in China. I think all of these can be promoted on their own merits. And as a matter of fact, we have been promoting and discussing these issues in their dedicated forums with our counterparts in China. And we do not see any issues or any problems in promoting these on this basis. The deficiency in flights certainly is something that we feel. The reason why there are not more flights has everything to do with lack of capacity of the concerned airlines, inavailability of landing slots, lack of infrastructure at the concerned airports, etc. So I think if we address those issues, the other issues will take care of themselves. The basic point is that we have, between India and China today, 36 bilateral forums, separate bilateral forums, to address each and every aspect of our relationship. And meetings take place regularly and with great intensity in many of these forums. And we are making progress in moving along our relationship, which is why I said that I feel that we are at a fairly good point in our relationship today. And I think that there is enough institutional muscle and institutional wherewithal available on both sides to take forward the relationship on that.
Well, what I want to say is, because we have been following the situation, especially since the Doklam or the Donglang incident, and I feel that the lack of understanding, the lack of interest between the people of these two countries seem to have contributed to some of the face-off that we witnessed. And I see these imbalance of numbers. For instance, 1.5 million of Indian tourists visited China last year, but only 300,000 Chinese visited India. For the world's most populous countries, these are unacceptable numbers, absolutely. So I'm thinking, maybe there is this need for greater intensity of efforts to promote such ties. In terms of facilitating such ties, you are in a very important position to grant visa, for instance, for the Chinese, and to raise the awareness of India in the Chinese people's mind and heart. What are you going to do? Are you going to make things much easier?
They are already easier. And let me make use of this platform that you have provided me to tell your viewers that we have already facilitated to a very great extent the process of visas for Chinese, intending Chinese tourists and travelers to India. First of all, China is in the list of countries that are eligible for an electronic visa to travel to India. So you don't need to make any trips to either the embassies or stand in lines at outsourcing centers, etc. You can sit in the comfort of your home or office and apply for an electronic visa. You get it within 72 hours, and you can land up in India with that piece of paper. That's number one. Number two, with regard to the two most applied for categories of visas, which are business visas and tourist visas, we have actually now added these categories in for much longer durations to the electronic visa thing. Earlier, you could only apply for short duration tourist visas electronically. Now you can apply for tourist and business visas electronically. Earlier, only single entry visas were allowed. Now you can have multiple entry tourist visas and business visas. And earlier, you had only 3 month duration visas, and now you can have 1 year visa. So you have a 1 year multiple entry tourist and business visa available electronically. We don't have reciprocity in this as yet. We would like it, but we leave it to the Chinese authorities to make travel to China as easy as we think we have made it for Chinese businessmen and Chinese tourists. I think that the point you make about lack of knowledge is very, very important. I think for two countries that share so much, our people, as even today, do not have the kind of intensity in their contacts that they should have. And this is across various walks of life, not just government officials. Media, academia, think tanks, universities, and the ordinary people on the road, they need to do much more. I think the two main vehicles for that, the two pillars for that, are cultural contacts, which subsumes within it the whole thing of films, cultural performances, etc., and the other is tourism and promoting the flow of tourists, on which, as I said, the series of steps we think can actually promote our contacts much further.
Okay, there will be an Asian Civilization Dialogue Forum taking place in Beijing in the month of May. How much importance are you going to put to this forum, and how do you think this is important for China and India to know each other better, to work together so that we can truly have an Asian century in the next century, let's say? Maybe not this one.
Well, why not this one?
Well, there is a debate there.
Well, I think there can be no Asian century without China and India. And as two preeminent and prominent civilizations of Asia, it is only natural that we should engage on this kind of a dialogue. We have received an invitation to participate, and we will be participating in it. There is also an exposition that is being undertaken of archaeological artifacts, civilizational symbols from various countries, and we will be sending an exposition for that as well. Considering the fact that it comes in the middle of our election season, I am not quite sure as to who or at what level the representation from government is going to be, but we do attach great importance to it. I think civilizational dialogue and civilizational connect is extremely important as a general principle internationally, but even more so between India and China. I think this might just be the opportunity to in fact help the understanding that we were talking about for the people of the two countries to understand each other better. So we very much look forward to participating in it.
Mm-hmm. This year also will mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of New China. Looking back, or from your perspective, from the Indian perspective, what do you think this means for humanity, for modern societies looking for the way to develop their own society in a way that suits their own historical and current circumstances? Well,
as I said, I have been in China only about 3 months or so, but even in these 3 months, what I have seen has impressed me enormously. And I'm probably just joining the legions of people who've been impressed enormously in the last few years to having witnessed the growth, the prosperity, the progress, and the achievements of China. There is great admiration and justified admiration around the world, including in India, for the achievements that China has made for itself. Despite following different political, social, and administrative systems that suit its objective conditions, China has brought a great deal of prosperity and progress to its people. I think much of the progress that has been registered globally on two important aspects, the reduction of poverty and the contribution to global growth, would have been a fraction of what it has been had China not been there, and had China not contributed these things. So I think that it is a very, very proud country that can look back at what it has achieved over the last 70 years. It has gone through its own trials and tribulations, and even today I think there are challenges, there will always be challenges, but I think the achievements that have been packed together in a relatively short period of time are remarkable. And there's a great deal to learn from that. And we in India would certainly like to learn, to observe and learn from some of the experiences that China has had. And talking about the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic, there will be another very important 70th anniversary a few months hence, which will start on the 1st of April 2020, which is the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and China. And we look forward to a year of very, very close and intense engagement between our two countries in trying to further strengthen this relationship.
Great, great. Well, this relationship definitely started since a very long time. The most famous that I can think of at the 7th century, the Chinese monk Xuanzang, who went to India to look for Buddhist scriptures, and he is known as the unknown king of the Silk Road. I hope that story can be continued in the near future. Well, Ambassador Misri, thank you so much for having accepted our interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.